She was obliged to marry a millionaire to honor her ancestor's will. But on wedding night— Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The rain had not stopped all afternoon. It fell in steady sheets across the old vineyard valley, turning the dirt road into ribbons of mud. Inside the grand estate of the late patriarch, the air smelled of polished wood and fading roses. At the long mahogany table sat a group of distant relatives, lawyers, and one young woman who did not belong among the silk and silver. Clara Nguyen pressed her hands together in her lap, her fingers cold despite the warmth of the fireplace. Her grandfather's attorney, a man with rimless glasses and a voice like dry paper, cleared his throat. As stated in the will, the vineyard and surrounding property shall pass to my granddaughter, Clara, under one condition. She must marry a member of the Parker bloodline before her 28th birthday. The words fell into the silence like stones dropped into a well. Clara blinked, unsure if she had heard correctly. Around her, whispers rippled through the room. Someone muttered that it was absurd, another called it old-fashioned. But the lawyer continued, "The designated heir, Ethan Parker, has already been notified." Ethan Parker. The name tightened in her chest. She had met him only once, years ago, at a family gathering where he had arrived in a charcoal suit and left without saying goodbye. Since then, he had become a millionaire through his tech empire, his face appearing in business magazines, his eyes cold even in print. Now, to keep her grandfather's legacy, she would have to marry him. Clara stood slowly, her voice small but steady. There must be another way. The vineyard is my family's heart. I have worked here since I was 16. The lawyer shook his head. Those are the terms, Miss Nguyen. If you refuse, the estate will be sold, and the proceeds distributed among the remaining heirs. Outside, thunder rolled over the hills. She could almost hear her grandfather's laughter echoing in the corridors, the way he used to tell her that this land carried the soul of their ancestors. Could she really let it go? 2 days later, in a glass tower overlooking the city, Ethan Parker stared at the same document. The rain beat against the windows behind him, matching the dull rhythm of his thoughts. A contract marriage, an inheritance clause, a name he barely remembered. He had no interest in vineyards or sentiment, but the land bordered one of his company's upcoming projects. If someone else bought it, it could threaten millions in investments. He turned the pen in his hand, a heavy silver one engraved with the letter P. His assistant asked if he would accept the condition. Ethan looked out at the skyline, his reflection sharp against the storm. "Arrange a meeting," he said quietly. When Clara arrived at his office the next morning, she felt small beneath the soaring ceiling and glass walls. Ethan greeted her with a polite nod, his expression unreadable. "Miss Nguyen," he said, his tone formal, distant. "I understand this is uncomfortable." Her voice wavered. "Uncomfortable is one word for it." He leaned back in his chair. "Then let us make it simple. I will honor your grandfather's will. You will have the vineyard, and I will have peace with my board." 6 months. A public marriage. Purely contractual. No intimacy, no interference, no scandal. Clara's breath caught. "You want a business agreement out of a marriage?" "I prefer to call it clarity," Ethan said. "We will both get what we want." Her eyes fell on the silver pen resting on the table. For a moment, she imagined her grandfather's calloused hands guiding hers, the scent of grapes and rain lingering in the air. She thought of the workers depending on her, the home she might lose, the promise she had whispered at his grave. "I will protect it." When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet but sure. "Then I will sign." Ethan handed her the pen. "Welcome to the arrangement, Mrs. Parker." Oh. Outside, the rain began to fade, leaving only the sound of water dripping from the roof and the faint hum of the city below. Clara held the pen tightly, unaware that the moment she pressed it to the paper, her life had already begun to change. The wedding happened quietly, almost like a business transaction. There were no guests, no music, and no flowers, except a single vase of lilies placed near the judge's desk. Clara stood beside Ethan in a simple ivory dress that her aunt had sewn for her. His suit was dark gray, tailored perfectly, every line precise. The ceremony lasted less than 10 minutes. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, Ethan turned to her, extended his hand, and said calmly, "Welcome to your new life, Mrs. Parker." The words felt heavy, almost foreign. Outside, the sky was pale with the first hint of spring. The rain had stopped, but puddles still shimmered on the courthouse steps. Clara glanced down at the silver ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, yet it did not feel like hers. A black sedan waited outside. As the driver opened the door, Ethan gestured for her to enter. The ride to his estate was silent, except for the hum of the engine. The city lights faded into long stretches of open road, and soon the car rolled through the iron gates of the Parker estate. The mansion rose before them like something from another world: stone columns, marble steps, windows that glowed against the dusk. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and lemon polish. A maid in uniform greeted them with a small bow. "Welcome home, sir. Welcome, madam." Clara managed a polite nod, her voice caught somewhere between awe and disbelief. Ethan led her through the grand foyer. "You will have your own room on the east wing," he said. "Meals are served at 7 and at 8 in the evening. You are not required to attend if you prefer privacy." His tone was courteous, almost distant, like he was explaining company policy. Clara followed in silence, her shoes clicking softly on the marble floor. Portraits lined the walls, men and women of the Parker lineage, all painted with the same solemn eyes. When they reached her room, Ethan opened the door for her. It was spacious and elegant, with white curtains and a view of the vineyard beyond the hill. She turned to thank him, but he was already leaving. "Good night, Clara," he said over his shoulder. The door closed with a soft click. Clara stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by quiet luxury. The bed was larger than any she had ever slept in. On the dresser lay a single envelope embossed with the Parker crest. Inside was a note written in neat, even handwriting. "Remember the rules. No personal interference, no emotional involvement. 6 months." She exhaled slowly, her chest tightening. So this was marriage by contract. She could almost hear her grandfather's voice asking if she was happy, and she did not know how to answer. Over the next few days, Clara adjusted to life in the mansion. The staff treated her respectfully, but with caution, unsure whether to see her as their new mistress or just a temporary guest. She spent her mornings walking through the vineyard, tracing the old stone paths her grandfather once tended. In the afternoons, she sat by the window sketching the hills, the sunlight, and sometimes the shadow of a man watching from a distance. Ethan kept to his office most of the time. He worked long hours, his door closed, his phone always pressed to his ear. At dinner, they sat opposite each other at the long dining table, the silence between them filled only by the faint clink of silverware. One evening, as rain began to fall again, Clara decided to break the quiet. "You really do not talk much, do you?" she said softly. Ethan looked up from his plate, surprised. "I prefer not to say what does not need to be said," she smiled faintly. "That sounds like a very lonely philosophy." Ugh. For a moment, something flickered in his expression, perhaps regret, perhaps fatigue. Then he looked down again. "Loneliness is easier to manage than disappointment." The words lingered in the air long after the meal ended. Later that night, unable to sleep, Clara wandered through the corridor and found herself outside his study. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Ethan sat at his desk, staring at an old photograph framed in silver. She could see it from where she stood, a boy of about 10, smiling beside a woman in a vineyard. The resemblance was unmistakable. Ethan's voice broke the silence. "She loved that place more than anything," he said without turning around. Clara froze, realizing he knew she was there. "My mother. The vineyard was her heart. When she died, my father sold it to settle debts. I told myself I would never set foot there again." Clara stepped into the room quietly. "And yet you bought it back." "Oh." He nodded, his gaze still on the photograph. "Not for sentiment, for control. I wanted to make sure no one else ruined it." "But that is not control," she said gently. "That is grief." For the first time, Ethan looked at her directly. The mask he wore every day slipped, revealing a flicker of pain behind his calm gray eyes. He did not answer. Instead, he reached into the drawer and handed her something, a folded letter, yellowed with age. "Your grandfather wrote this to my mother once. He said the vineyard was built on hope, not wealth. Maybe you should keep it." Clara took the letter, her heart trembling. "Thank you," she whispered. As she left the study, the storm outside grew louder, wind rattling the windows. She looked down at the letter in her hands and realized that the walls between them were beginning to crack, not through words or contracts, but through quiet moments like this, moments that neither of them had planned for, yet could no longer ignore. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows, washing the marble floor in gold. Clara woke early, the sound of distant workers drifting from the vineyard below. For the first time since her arrival, the mansion felt alive. She dressed simply in a white shirt and jeans, tied her hair back, and went outside. The air smelled of earth and grapes. Down by the rows of vines, she met Mr. Lopez, the vineyard caretaker who had known her grandfather for years. His weathered face lit up when he saw her. "Miss Clara," he said warmly, "the vines have missed your hands." She smiled. "I have missed them too." She spent hours helping the workers trim branches and gather early harvest samples. Her shoes were muddy, her palms stained green, but her heart felt lighter than it had in weeks. When she looked up toward the mansion, she noticed a figure standing on the balcony. Ethan. He watched silently for a few moments, then turned away. Later that afternoon, as Clara returned to the house, she found Ethan waiting near the library. He was holding the same letter her grandfather had written to his mother. "You are not afraid to get dirty," he said, his tone almost teasing. Clara wiped her hands on a towel. "The vineyard does not care about suits or titles. It only grows for those who nurture it." He looked at her with quiet curiosity. "You talk about it as if it were alive." "It is," she said softly. "It was my grandfather's way of breathing. Every season tells a story." For a brief second, Ethan's face softened. Then he turned, changing the subject. "There is a shareholders' gala this Friday. I would like you to come with me. It will help calm the rumors about our arrangement." "Of course," she replied. "That is part of the deal, right?" His expression flickered again, unreadable. "Yes, part of the deal." When Friday arrived, the mansion buzzed with preparation. A stylist helped Clara choose a gown the color of champagne and pinned her hair into soft waves. As she looked at her reflection, she hardly recognized herself. Ethan entered the room, dressed in a black tuxedo, and paused. For the first time, his composure slipped. "You look different," he said quietly. Clara turned toward him. "You mean I look expensive?" He almost smiled. "I mean you look beautiful." Those words stayed with her long after they left for the gala. The ballroom shimmered with crystal chandeliers and the low murmur of elite conversation. Cameras flashed as they entered, hand in hand. The image was perfect, two people who looked every bit the power couple. But Clara's heart raced. She could feel eyes following her, judging her every move. During dinner, a journalist leaned across the table, smirking. "Mrs. Parker, you come from a rather modest background, do you not? How does it feel to step into this world?" Clara froze. The question was meant to humiliate her. Before she could answer, Ethan placed his hand gently on hers. His voice was firm but calm. "She stepped into this world because she belongs here. The vineyard she protects has been part of our family's history longer than any of these investors have been alive." The table went silent. The journalist lowered his eyes, embarrassed. Ethan continued, his gaze steady. "Clara is the heart of that land, and I am proud to stand beside her." Applause broke out from a few guests. Clara's cheeks warmed, her eyes shimmering. For the first time, Ethan had not spoken like a businessman. He had spoken like someone who believed in her. As the night went on, they danced under the golden light. It was supposed to be for show, yet when Ethan's hand rested on her back, something inside her shifted. His touch was careful, respectful, but filled with a quiet sincerity that startled her. When the song ended, she looked up at him. That was not in the contract. He met her gaze. "Maybe the contract needs revising." They both laughed softly, and for a moment, the world around them disappeared. The crowd, the cameras, the whispered judgments. There was only the rhythm of their breaths, and the faint scent of roses in the air. But peace, as Clara would soon learn, never lasts long in a life built on conditions. Later that evening, after they returned home, Ethan received a call. His tone grew sharp, his voice low. Clara could hear fragments from the hallway, words like shareholder, leak, and contract. When he hung up, his expression was grim. She asked quietly, "Is something wrong?" He hesitated before answering. "Someone knows about our agreement." Clara's stomach dropped. "How?" "I do not know yet," he said. "But if the board discovers the truth, they will use it against both of us." The rain began to fall again outside, tapping against the windows like restless fingers. Clara looked at him, her voice trembling. "Then what do we do?" Ethan exhaled, his eyes shadowed with worry. "We stay calm, and we stand together, no matter what happens." For the first time, the words did not sound like a business decision. They sounded like a promise. Clara nodded, clutching the letter from her grandfather close to her chest. The storm outside echoed her heartbeat, steady and uncertain, as if the world itself was holding its breath for what would come next. Clara left the mansion before sunrise, the fog still hanging low over the vineyard. Her small suitcase rolled softly over the gravel path. Every step away from that house felt like peeling off a piece of her heart. She did not know where she would go, only that she could no longer stay in a place built on lies. She returned to the small cottage that once belonged to her grandfather's caretaker. The roof leaked, and the windows rattled in the wind. But it was quiet and real. She spent her days cleaning, planting flowers, and helping the vineyard workers who still respected her. They brought her food, news, and silent comfort. At night, she sat on the porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the glowing lights of the Parker estate on the hill. Somewhere behind those walls, Ethan was fighting to keep his company alive, but she could not bring herself to call him. Meanwhile, Ethan faced a war he had not prepared for. The board had demanded his resignation. Investors withdrew. His assistant handed him a printed headline that read, "Ethan Parker's empire crumbles under scandal." He set it down slowly, his expression hollow. For the first time, he realized how empty success was without someone to share it with. Days turned into weeks. He worked relentlessly, attending hearings, facing shareholders, and denying false claims that Clara had married him for money. Still, the damage grew. He had spent his entire life controlling outcomes, but this time, he could not control the truth. One evening, he returned to the vineyard alone. The house was dark except for a single lamp glowing through the window of the old cottage. He hesitated before knocking. When Clara opened the door, surprise flickered in her eyes, followed by guarded calm. "You should not be here," she said softly. "I had to see you," Ethan replied. "The company is falling apart, but that is not why I came. I came because I finally understand what I lost." Clara crossed her arms, her tone steady. "You lost trust, Ethan, and trust cannot be bought back with apologies or contracts." "I know," he said, voice low, "but maybe it can be earned." He reached into his coat pocket and placed the silver pen on the table, the same pen she had used to sign the contract. "No more deals, no more conditions. I want to make things right, starting with you." Clara looked at the pen, then at him. "You cannot rewrite the past," she whispered. "No," Ethan said, "but I can start living for the future you believed in." The rain began again outside, soft and steady. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The distance between them was smaller now, yet filled with the weight of everything left unsaid. When he finally left, Clara stood by the window, watching his car disappear into the mist. She did not know if she could forgive him yet, but somewhere deep inside, hope stirred like the first bloom after a long winter. A week later, the vineyard prepared for the spring harvest festival, the first since Clara's grandfather had passed away. Lanterns hung from the trees, the scent of fresh bread and ripe grapes filled the evening air, and villagers gathered with quiet joy. For them, the vineyard was more than land. It was tradition, memory, and home. Clara had almost convinced herself not to attend, but Mr. Lopez came to her cottage that morning with a gentle smile. "Your grandfather would want you there," he said. "This place began with your family. It should not celebrate without you." So she went. She wore a simple white dress and carried a basket of flowers for the memorial table. The sun dipped low, painting the hills in orange and gold. People greeted her kindly, as if the scandal had never existed. For a few hours, she felt like herself again. Across the field, she noticed movement, a black car stopping at the edge of the property. Ethan stepped out, dressed not in his usual suit but in a plain shirt and dark jeans. No security, no entourage. Just him. The crowd turned as he walked toward the stage where Mr. Lopez was speaking. Whispers spread quickly. Some people frowned, others waited in silence. Ethan climbed the steps and took the microphone, his voice steady but raw. "I know many of you have read things about me, and about this vineyard," he began. "Most of them are true. I was proud, selfish, and I treated this land as property, not as a legacy. But someone reminded me that legacy is not built on contracts. It is built on care." He turned toward Clara. "That someone is the reason I am here tonight." The crowd murmured softly. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding. Ethan continued, "I am donating full ownership of the vineyard back to the Nguyen Foundation, in memory of her grandfather. Every worker, every family who depends on this land, will remain part of it. I do not want to control it anymore. I only want to protect it." The audience erupted into applause, some cheering, some wiping tears. Clara's eyes filled with emotion. She could hardly breathe. After the speech, Ethan walked toward her slowly, the noise of the crowd fading behind them. "You once told me the vineyard was alive," he said gently. "I believe you now. I want to help it grow, not as its owner, but as someone who finally understands what it means to love." Clara felt her walls begin to crack. "You gave away everything," he smiled faintly. "No, I kept what matters." For a moment neither spoke. The music from the festival drifted through the air, violins, laughter, and the soft rhythm of hope. When Clara finally reached for his hand, it was not a business gesture, not a public show. It was quiet, real, and filled with the promise of something new. That night, as lanterns floated into the dark sky, the vineyard seemed to breathe again, alive, forgiving, and full of second chances. The days following the festival were calm for the first time in months. The press lost interest, the crowds disappeared, and the vineyard returned to its quiet rhythm. Workers sang while tending the vines, and children ran between the rows carrying baskets of grapes. The storm that had torn their lives apart seemed to have finally passed. Clara spent her mornings teaching the local children how to paint, using the vineyard as her classroom. In the afternoons, she met with Mr. Lopez to plan the next season's planting schedule. Her heart felt lighter now, though she still hesitated whenever Ethan's name came up. Ethan, meanwhile, kept his promise. He stepped down as chief executive officer of his company and began working with the Nguyen Foundation. Instead of conference calls and board meetings, his days were filled with community projects, rebuilding trust, and learning the patience of honest work. He visited the vineyard often, but always kept a respectful distance, never forcing conversation. One afternoon he arrived with a group of volunteers carrying boxes of seedlings. Clara was overseeing the children painting wooden signs for the new garden. When she saw him, she paused, unsure whether to approach. Ethan noticed her hesitation and smiled gently. "We could use your artistic touch," he said. She laughed softly, the first time in a long while. "You never stop finding ways to recruit me." He shrugged. "Maybe I finally learned to ask instead of assume." Together, they spent the afternoon planting young vines. Their hands brushed occasionally, neither of them pulling away. The silence between them was no longer tense, it was peaceful, filled with understanding. When they finished, the sun was sinking behind the hills, turning the sky amber. Ethan looked at the rows they had planted. "You once said every season tells a story. What story will this one tell?" Clara brushed the dirt from her palms. "Maybe the one about forgiveness." He nodded slowly. "Then I hope it ends well." Ogre. That night, Ethan returned to his old office for the last time. He cleared his desk, leaving behind files, awards, and the nameplate that once defined him. Only one thing remained, the silver pen. He picked it up, turning it in his hand. The same pen that had started everything. For a long moment, he stared at it, then slipped it into his pocket. The next morning, he went to the vineyard early. Clara was already there, sketching near the gate. He stood quietly for a moment before speaking. "Clara, there is something I would like to show you." She followed him down the path to the old storage barn. When he opened the doors, her breath caught. Inside was a small exhibition space, filled with her paintings, the vineyard, and every season, her grandfather's portrait, the rolling hills after rain. Above the entrance hung a sign carved from oak, "The Art of Clara Nguyen." Her voice trembled. "You did this?" Ethan nodded. "With the help of the community. They wanted to honor what you have given them. I only gave it a name." Clara's eyes glistened with tears. She turned toward him, her words barely a whisper. "You remembered the sketchbook?" He smiled. "Some things are worth remembering." For a moment, they simply stood there, surrounded by color, light, and silence. Then Ethan took the silver pen from his pocket and placed it in her hand. "The contract once divided us," he said softly. "Maybe now it can seal something real." "Oh," Clara looked down at the pen, her fingers trembling. "What are you asking me, Ethan?" He met her eyes. "To start over. No conditions, no signatures, just us." Her answer came not in words, but in the way she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his. The scent of paint and wine filled the air. Outside, the morning sun spilled across the vines, bright and forgiving. It was the beginning of another story, one not written by obligation, but by choice. A few months passed, and summer settled gently over the valley. The vineyard shimmered under the golden sun, its rows alive with color and scent. The exhibition that Ethan had created for Clara drew visitors from nearby towns. People came not only to see the art but to feel the peace that hung in the air. For the first time, the land felt like home again, not just to her, but to everyone who worked there. Clara had grown used to seeing Ethan among the workers, sleeves rolled up, helping to load crates or repair fences. He no longer looked like the man from the magazines. The suit and distance had been replaced by something simpler: humility. Sometimes, when their eyes met across the field, she would see warmth instead of the cold precision he once carried. One afternoon, as the heat began to fade, Ethan approached her by the old fountain where she was sketching. He carried 2 glasses of lemonade, setting one beside her. "You have been avoiding me," he said with a quiet smile. Clara laughed softly. "I have been busy. The harvest does not wait." "Neither does life," he replied. His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "There is something I need to ask." She looked up, curious. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "The board has offered to reinstate me as chief executive officer. They want me back to stabilize the company, but I have not given them an answer yet." Clara's heart tightened. "You should do what feels right for you." He nodded. "That is the thing, Clara. I do not know what feels right anymore. Success used to mean control. Now I am not sure it means anything without purpose." She placed her sketchbook on the bench. "Purpose is not found in titles, Ethan. It is found in what you choose to give." He looked at her quietly, the words sinking in. "Then I want to give this vineyard everything I have left. And maybe, if you will let me, give you the rest of me too." Clara felt her breath catch. The world seemed to still around them, the hum of the wind, the rustle of leaves, the distant laughter of workers. "You are asking for more than a second chance," she whispered. "I am asking for a life," he said simply. For a moment, she could not speak. She saw the sincerity in his eyes, the man who had learned to love not through wealth or power, but through loss and redemption. Slowly, she reached for his hand. "Then start by staying," she said. Ethan exhaled, relief washing over his face. He smiled, a real, unguarded smile. "I can do that." That evening, as twilight deepened, the workers gathered for a small dinner under the vines. Lanterns hung from the trees, casting soft circles of light. Ethan stood beside Clara, watching the community that had once been divided now, sharing food, laughter, and hope. Mr. Lopez raised a toast. "To new beginnings," he said. Glasses clinked, laughter echoed, and for the first time, Ethan felt truly part of something that could not be bought or sold. Later, when the others had gone, Clara and Ethan walked along the vineyard path. The air was warm, filled with the scent of grapes and wildflowers. He stopped and turned to her. "When I first came here, I thought I was saving this place, but you are the one who saved me." She smiled softly. "You just needed to remember who you were." He took her hand, holding it gently. "And what if I forget again? Then I will remind you," she said. The moon rose high above them, silver light spilling over the vines. They stood in silence, the world around them breathing in rhythm with their hearts. The vineyard, once a symbol of duty and debt, had become a witness to love that was finally real, free, and alive. Autumn returned to the valley like a slow exhale. The leaves on the vineyard turned shades of copper and gold, and the air carried the scent of ripened grapes and rain. It had been 1 full year since the day Clara had signed her name on a contract that had changed both of their lives. Now, as the anniversary approached, the vineyard prepared for its annual harvest celebration. Clara stood at the edge of the field, the wind tugging gently at her hair. Around her, workers laughed as they filled wooden crates with grapes, their voices carrying through the hills. The scene filled her with quiet pride. This land, once the source of pain and division, had become a place of peace again. Behind her, footsteps approached. She turned and saw Ethan walking toward her, dressed simply in a white shirt and dark vest, his sleeves rolled up. He looked at ease, almost boyish, the sunlight glinting off his hair. "You have been hiding from the party," he said softly. She smiled. "I am not hiding. I am remembering." "Your grandfather would be proud," he said. "So would my mother." They stood in silence for a moment, listening to the rustle of the vines. Then Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out something small, wrapped in a linen cloth. "I have one more thing to return," he said. Clara frowned slightly as he opened the cloth. Inside lay the silver pen, the same one she had used to sign their contract a year ago. Its surface was worn now, but it still gleamed in the afternoon light. "I kept this," he said quietly, "because I thought it symbolized everything I had done wrong. But I realized it also reminds me of what we built afterward. This pen started our story with a lie. Maybe today, it can end with the truth." He handed it to her, then knelt on one knee. From his other hand, he revealed a small velvet box. Inside was her grandfather's ring, polished and shining like new. Clara gasped softly, tears filling her eyes. Ethan looked up at her, his voice steady but full of emotion. "Clara Nguyen, you taught me what love truly means. You showed me that real strength is kindness, and that legacy is not wealth. It is the way we treat each other. I do not want a contract. I do not want conditions. I just want a promise. Will you marry me for real this time?" The crowd behind them grew silent as people turned to watch. Clara covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The wind carried the faint sound of laughter and the whisper of vines swaying together like applause. Finally, she nodded. "Yes," she said through her tears. This time without any signatures, just love. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger, and the crowd erupted into cheers. Lanterns floated upward into the golden sky as the sun began to set. Mr. Lopez raised his glass once again. "To love that grows stronger than contracts," he declared. Music began to play, soft and joyful. Ethan pulled Clara close, and they danced among the vines as the light faded. The vineyard glowed under a sky painted with stars. Later that night, when the guests had gone, and only the hum of crickets remained, Clara and Ethan stood together on the balcony of the old mansion, overlooking the land that had brought them together. Clara rested her head against his shoulder. "Do you think the vineyard will remember us?" she asked quietly. Ethan smiled, his arm tightening around her. "I think it already does. Every vine, every season, every sunrise, it is all a part of us now." The wind carried their laughter through the valley, mingling with the scent of grapes and earth. For the first time, there were no conditions, no contracts, no fears, only love, real and lasting, blooming beneath the same sky that had once watched them fall apart. And in that gentle autumn evening, the story that began as an obligation ended as a promise.